really hard to figure out how we were going to pick who was going to be up at the front. And we thought through this, and we said when there was several small candidates that came forward, and we said, well, what are we going to do? And we thought, you know what? This is actually a teaching moment. What Fair Vote is advocating for is moderately proportional representation for Canada, which means that we need to have a threshold of support before you actually have a member in Parliament. New Zealand has 5% as the threshold. Here in our riding, the Communist Party of Canada managed to get 0.2% of popular vote in the last election. They ran candidates in 20 of the 308 ridings, and they reached 0.02% of the national popular vote. So we were concerned about having a special interest take up a disproportionate amount of time in the conversation. So we made a decision as Fair Vote that we would invite Tristan to ask the first question of the panel, but not actually have Tristan be one of the panelists. And I just wanted to bring forward this explanation, and thank you for your coming this evening and support of Fair Vote Canada. Very much appreciated.
And we would like to offer Tristan the first opportunity to ask a question.
First of all, there's something I really want to clarify. And that is that we do actually have some barriers to entry in the existing system that we have now. First of all, for a small party to actually run candidates in a riding, that's $1,000 per candidate. Okay, there are tolls that you have to pay. The Communist Party actually had to take out loans to pay for the 30 candidates it is running in this election. It's not an easy thing. When you don't have the resources, when you don't have wealthy backers, when you don't have the kind of resources that the mainstream parties have, it's very difficult to break that in. So there are many reasons why we are not able to run candidates. We would like to run candidates in every riding in this country. We absolutely would. We've run candidates in many, many ridings in the past. Sometimes under very, very adverse situations. You have to understand, of course, this was kind of proven by some of the things people have actually said while I was asking people for a vote. There was such thing as anti-communism in this country. There's such a thing as the Cold War. There's a lot of prejudicial attitudes to people like me who come up and talk to you. And when we try to put our ideas out there, there's a massive threshold already. Even us to get like 0.2% or whatever it was, that's a challenge. And of course, we're not the only ones. There are many small parties that are out there fighting, very, very sincere about what they believe. But there's a system that blocks them from participating. It's more than just the first past the post criteria. There's more to it than that. I'd like to ask actually candidates if they actually have any plans to abolish things like the $1,000 toll that you have to pay if you want to be a candidate. Things like this. Have they considered this?
Seems like a very good question. Since we do have a bit of time, if perhaps you could respond to Mr. Dineen's question and perhaps to each other as well, in your earlier comments.
I think we have the shared microphone tonight. The $1,000 has to come from a personal account, and it is from each candidate has to find $1,000 from friends, relatives, or on their own. And really, the electoral system has been modified so that money going into campaigns has to be personal checks, not business checks. So my comment is it was a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice for you as well as our family and then families here to do what we've had to do, and that's the price of democracy in Canada.
I would like to see any impediment to people being able to be candidates to be lowered. I think, I can't speak directly to the Elections Canada Act at this point, but certainly if we can find ways of making it simpler for people to be candidates and come up here and speak what their party is and speak what their heart is, and that's what we should be able to do, and that's what we should be able for people to do.
Well, I think the thing that hasn't been said is that the Conservative government removed the per vote subsidy of political parties. That something in the Green Party would restore, because although you have to get a threshold for a political party, I acknowledge that, and that's a point of discussion and perhaps another barrier should indicate, but nonetheless, I think there's a fundamental fairness in having that roughly $2 per vote available to parties to work between elections, and that was taken away. It actually it was targeted at all smaller parties to make them less viable, and that's something that we would like to see absolutely restored, simply to bring more fairness. Now, whether it would apply to the very smallest or on some threshold, I don't know, but at least it's the concept that when you got to that low level, you would have some regular funding for the party to do things between elections.
Yes, go ahead. We do have a microphone set up, so for those who are able, if you would make your way to the microphone, and we also, I believe, have a floating microphone. No, the battery died. Okay, but do try, do try to be succinct, and we'll try to get as many people asking questions as possible that way, and to remain as much as possible on topic. So please go ahead.
Thanks very much for the debate and bringing this topic to Guelph. Well, I want to say one thing I'm a bit sad about is that the Conservative Party is not represented, so we don't have a full spectrum. I think that's quite important. So that's the first element of democracy lacking tonight. And I'd like to defend very briefly first past the post, because I think it is a fair system within each riding. And the wider debate that's happening is when fairness is translated outside, beyond the riding, to the nation and to vote share. And it's often retrospective when those people have lost the vote within particular ridings, and perhaps within the broader nation when it's perceived as being unfair. So I think there is a degree of fairness within each riding, in that the person who wins the most votes goes to Ottawa. So I think what we need to look at is, are we getting democracy when we have that group of MPs within Ottawa representing all of those ridings, now 338. So that has to do with voter turnout, which nobody has spoken about. It has to do perhaps with getting more young people involved in voting. And I think perhaps also we need to look at how questions are fed through to the Prime Minister via the opposition, and perhaps to the opposition leaders. There could be a wider intake of questions to the opposition leaders, so that they are fed the questions that Canadians want to hear put to the Prime Minister, for instance. And the other thing that they have in the UK, which I think is admirable, is to have a question period outside the normal parliamentary question period, where everybody across the House can raise questions, and the Prime Minister has to take those questions. So those are some of the ways in which I think democracy, wider democracy, or a deeper democracy could be addressed. But in terms of first past the post, I wonder if you'd like to, well, I'd like you to reflect on that. I mean, perhaps I'm not understanding the distribution of the vote system properly. But do you think there's something to be said in relation to voter turnout, in relation to other forms of democracy, other than simply wanting to say we've now got to change the system, which might be more complex, because we have a simple, understandable, historical precedent since 1867, which is to have first past the post as a system within each riding. Thank you very much for your speeches and all the interesting comments you made, and for organising tonight. Thank you.
First past the post has now worked for us definitely for the past 4 years. We've had, as we know, a Conservative government that has run roughshod over Canada and been disrespectful to Parliament and to opposition. We did have a tradition where the government would be respectful to opposition and allow for discussion, and that has been shut down by Stephen Harper. Gloria not being here, Gloria Kovach not being here is her choice. And we certainly would have loved to have had Gloria be present, but she's not here. Proportional representation will bring in a broader spectrum of the Canadian public and represent the actual vote and the actual will of the Canadian people in Parliament. And that is what we need. And as we've been pointed out, proportional representation enforces cooperation. And the system right now allows for near dictatorial power. And we've got to ensure that that doesn't happen anymore. And we have to bring back at least tradition that has been in Parliament of respect for our democracy.
I say I'm in favor of a mixed member proportionality because half the members, roughly, there varies a little bit, half the members are essentially elected by the constituency, by the people. So you have the constituency, say, roughly twice as big, and you would have an elected member who was the person that won the most votes. You have other members that were on the party list that would come to fill out, to balance it off for the proportionality. So you still would have at least one member. You'd have more than one member in the riding, but you'd have at least one member that was the person that got the most votes and people chose. So that's one aspect that we save from that system. But you mentioned voter turnout, absolutely critically important. And to me, the biggest issue of the failure of the first past and post is the lack of participation. We got, we much discussion tonight. It was 39% for the Conservatives to get a majority, but that was 39% of only a 60% turnout. Quick math tells you that of the people who could vote in that election, only 24% voted for the Conservatives and gave the Conservatives 100% of the power, which they have wielded over the other parties. So that's the flaw that we're trying to get. Certainly you mentioned various aspects of House rules, and certainly House rules have to change too, but the Tories have used this power they have to take Parliament away from Parliament, members of Parliament, and concentrate it in the Prime Minister's office in a way you don't see in the United Kingdom, in a way you see nowhere else in the world. Effectively, in Canada, we have an elected dictatorship right now, because the concentration. The Green Party would change the House rules so members of Parliament from all parties could participate in the House as we intended them to do in Parliaments. The Green Party would cut the Prime Minister, by legislation, cut the budget of the Prime Minister's office by at least half, to triple. So we have as the expression goes, that the girls and boys in short pants go around and telling all the members who we legitimately sent to Parliament how to vote. That's the kind of change we need in Parliament. And it's House rules related, so it's broader than just proportional, but it won't happen until we get that proportional representation to allow that.
This might be a bit of a challenge. When you look at the history of Canada and the Westminster system, when you have a two-party system, it's pretty easy to get a majority out of the vote. When the country develops after the First World War, to have more than two parties, mathematically it becomes really challenging to have a majority. And that's Anita covered that very well. So really I think it's an indication of the maturing of a country where diverse opinions are forming parties, and then you have to accommodate diverse opinions to get the best ideas out there. And the only way to do that is by fundamentally changing the way that the electoral system is working. And we didn't have too much time for our reflection on comments, but if we did, I would have said that there was no waffling in the Liberal Party on supporting this or not supporting. Those that didn't support Craig Scott's motion, which was a great motion, Frank Valerian supported it, just for the record. The ones that didn't said there wasn't consultation, and you can't have democratic reform without involving the people. So you can't cram a system down people. And that's what was tried provincially, and it failed. So it has to be effective and communicated in a way that people get a hold of it and understand why it's important.
All right, right, so first of all, I just wanted to thank you for those really great speeches and whatnot. And I just wanted to touch on a few sort of topics here. And the first one is directed to all the candidates, really, but mostly to Mr. Seagram and Mr. Miller. And I'm curious as to why you thought that MMP was the best system, because while admittedly it is a lot better than what we have right now, it would fix most of the problems in Parliament, but I don't think it would fix most of the problems in the riding. You still vote for one MP, and it leaves a lot of people who voted in the ridings really unrepresented. For example, in the UK election this year, in one of the ridings, they elected their MP with less than 25% of the votes. And I don't really see how that would change. And also another problem with MMP is I think you're giving more power to parties and less to the local representatives, which I think is the whole point of what our parliamentary democracy system was founded upon. So I'm just curious as to why you decided on that instead of, for example, STV, which they use in Ireland, where simply their constituencies elect multiple MPs. So they have a threshold of, say, 5 MPs, each has to get 20% of the vote. And so you'd have several candidates, which represents more of the riding. It's not as representational in Parliament, but maybe it's more on the riding level, so I'm just a little curious.
I got the mic, I'll go first, I guess. What you're talking about is a single transferable vote, which is another proportional representation. And in fairness to my leader, I have to say that Elizabeth has left that open. She wants a democratic commission set up with all the parties, and she's willing to entertain either a single transferable vote or a mixed member proportional, which I personally favor, or something else if we have something else out there. But to answer your question, I like MMP because it's most similar to what we have and it's easiest to understand. The single transferable vote is not the complicated issue. There's quite a bit of mathematics involved in doing it properly. It's probably, according to the academics, the ultimate fairest system, or the closest, the purest form of proportional representation. But a mixed member is something we can understand. I think you still have somebody you can vote for as the representative, and then you have other people who you can look at their qualifications and pick off a list and support, and the party can put in place to balance off the House vote in the House. So it's not perfect. It's just a whole lot better than what we got, and I think it's understandable. If I was to be the member trying to explain a single transferable vote to a mixed audience like this, it would be a difficult thing. Whereas MMP people can understand.
I support MMP because you're saying, yes, there are some issues with it, and as I said, it's not a perfect system. You do still have that local vote. You still have that local constituency vote, and that would be a first-past-the-post system. But you have the second ballot. You have on the ballot. You have the second choice, where you have roaming candidates or sort of regional candidates that you can choose from. You can choose who you want specifically and or just the party. So if you would like a woman to be present, then you can choose to have a woman member. It allows for more flexibility.
Right, if I could just interrupt, is there a weakness where the party will make lists and then depending on whether or not they have good behavior, they'll say, okay, you get this seat, you get this seat, and we just get into a problem with an increased number of getting whipped? And I remember Mr. Longfield said he didn't want anybody to be whipped. So isn't there a danger that it'll give more power to the party and take away from the local representation, which is what our system is founded upon?
What it allows is you are given the list when you go in, right? So then you can then choose from that list, and it can be as long. And then if the party that is there that only doesn't have a list that you like, then you don't support the party. But yeah, we work in a party system, so that's the challenge, But definitely, it allows for a much broader spectrum, and it allows for a much better representation for the people that are voting and for the electorate.
We will have our opinions, and our opinions matter a little bit. But the opinions of Canadians matter a lot more. We've got 3 systems that we've looked at. We've got the Law Commission of Canada, which Looks easy to sell. It's a fairly straightforward system. It's tried and true. We have the Jenkins-inspired model out of the UK. It's got a little bit more closely aligned with proportionality, a little bit more accurate. We've got a P3 model from Stéphane Dion in Canada, and he's an academic, so we'll leave it at that. But so the real change agenda that the Liberal Party has 32 elements of how do you get to open and fair government. And that's what the Liberal Party says, but that's only the opinion of a party. Again, it has to be part of a discussion, and within 18 months, other countries take 4 years, but we're better in Canada.
If I may, I asked that exact same question in New Zealand. What about the lists? They're picked by the parties, doesn't that? And here's the answer I got. Because the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment said, you know, Gord, he says, here's how it worked. The very first time when this came in, the parties loaded the list with their hacks. But you know what happened? The media, when somebody in a first past the post, or the first part of the MMP, where you nominate a candidate, the media never criticize who the candidate is. You have to accept them. They're nominated from amongst the party members, and that's a fair system. But the media took a look at the lists, the people who were put down by the party, and they said, who's this guy? And how come this person's here? And then they started hitting them in the media and saying, this person is just a hack. They don't deserve to be on the list. And there was huge embarrassment. That only happened in one election. After that, when you looked at all the parties' lists, you had the most impressive list of people up there that you could find. Because that's how the system writes itself. So I just want to give
for your positions on proportional representation. It's something that I have supported for a very, very long time because I'm getting old. But my question today, Mr. Longfield, you touched on it. I sat in a courtroom last year and I listened to Judge Hearn say that Michael Sona did not act alone. So I got together, there's a wonderful person in our community who coordinated a letter from 30 of us that we sent to Elections Canada, asking them to reopen the case. If it is true, in fact, or not true, we would really like Elections Canada to take on that challenge and do another investigation. The response we got really surprised me, and it not only surprised me, it really angered me. In 2011, I got that call. And I had been in the hospital and I'm disabled, and it was a real challenge for me to figure out what to do that day. But I figured it out. I had the wits about me to call Elections Canada and find out that my poll had not moved. So, long story short, I guess the response that we got from Mr. Mayron basically said that Elections Canada can do nothing. It also said that they couldn't investigate fraud. They no longer had that ability. And they wanted to assure us that our voter information was protected. Well, I'm sorry, but it wasn't very protected. I don't know if proportional representation would address this issue, but it's clear to me an investigation needs to take place. And I personally want some satisfaction for what happened. And I know there are others that feel the same way I do. I heard what you said, Mr. Longfield, but I really want to know specifics. What are you going to do to fix Elections Canada? This other person, the election commissioner, he's not going to open the investigation. He seems to be arm's length, but not really. So I really need to know what each of your parties are going to do about this matter. And I will sign up and help whoever gets elected here. I'm the first one on your doorstep to assist and participate in proportional representation messaging and combating election fraud. Thank you.
I won't read an answer, but the answer is under strengthening Elections Canada section of realchange.ca, where you have to do some of what you're saying. Elections Canada right now is being controlled by the Conservative Party as the Government of Canada, and it has to be controlled by a third party. It's much like there are other offices at the Government of Canada that the audit office is not controlled by the Government of Canada. It reports directly to Parliament. So if we look at the changes that need to be happening, when the email came to me and we're running a campaign which now in Guelph means we have to raise an extra $150,000 because of the extended election period. It's in the summertime, we're trying to find volunteers, and now an extra $150,000 under the bed. We pushed it up to the office of the Liberal Party of Canada to say that here's a concern in Guelph. One of my colleagues in Etobicoke lost by less than 100 votes last time. Took it to court, paid $360,000 through the riding association, lost, but in the process found out that one Conservative voted 26 times. And then the wall came up. So we're not dealing with a fair situation, we have to make it fair. And we will make it fair after the election.
The robocall scandal was a disgrace, and it was a tragedy for Guelph, and it happened, as I think if any of you saw the movement on robocalls, it happened all across the country. It was a coordinated effort. We need to re-empower Elections Canada. We need to give them to be able to investigate and to go out and prosecute and bring charges and ensure that we do not ever have that kind of fraud in Canada again. The NDP will as I said, will repeal the Unfair Elections Act. We will go in and we will ensure that Elections Canada is not a partisan arm of the government. They should not have said no to another investigation of the robocall scandal. That is clearly there was conspiracy elements that we're aware of, and they should follow through. And after we're elected as government, we will make sure, once again, bring it back after we're elected to Elections Canada. And we will, well, they will, because they'll be partisan or non-partisan, an arm's length organization, and they will decide again on the validity of your concerns.
Well, I was a parliamentary officer, an independent parliamentary officer in the Ontario Parliament for 15 years. My colleagues included the Chief Electoral Officer. And I can tell you that in 15 years there, when there was 8, now 9, independent parliamentary officers, we went through several governments, and to my knowledge, certainly in my case and to my knowledge, we were never interfered with, we were never denied, we were allowed to exercise the full discretion of our power. I was appalled what was happening at the federal, when I saw my federal colleagues, the Harper government violated the very concept of parliamentary privilege applied to these people. It took away from the Chief Electoral Officer the right to prosecute for violations of the Canada Elections Act, which has to be restored. We all agree on that. And it took away also, with them we haven't mentioned, it took away the authority of the Chief Electoral Officer to promote the voting, the action of voting. I mean, something as fundamental as that. We mentioned earlier poor turnout. We actually have allowed voter suppression to be installed at the highest level within Elections Canada. It has to be absolutely reversed. I think all three parties that are here all have the same position, that we reverse it. We had a system that worked before, let's go back to it.
Before, if you'll bear with me, I've been asked to announce that Ken is going around the room with envelopes, and that for various reasons it's important that if you wish to make a donation that you do it in the envelope with the information. There are several people with envelopes moving about the room. Just to reiterate, Gloria Kovac was invited this evening, and that she declined and cited a scheduling conflict. Please, sir, if you would.
Thank you very much. I think it's appropriate that we are in a church and we should do something religious, so we'll take up the question. I am sorry that Gloria is not here because most of my remarks have been directed at her. Winston Churchill once said that democracy is the worst form of government, but it's better than all the rest. So here we are stuck with this democracy, and we have to try to fix it. And I think there's some excellent ideas here tonight on how to fix it. I have never really been that active in politics other than voting, but I have got so fed up with this current government, I can't sit on my fanny any longer. Just to start off with a few, and then I'll close it off. But first of all, it calls an election a long weekend in the summer on a Sunday morning. Magically, the Conservative signs are all out. Well, you know, there's a book here in the building that says the first shall be last and the last shall be first. I hope that comes to fruition. Mr. Harper is a one-man band, and I've said this personally. He's the closest thing Canada's ever had to a dictator. But we can get rid of him with a ballot, not a bullet. Too much power in the PMO's office. Bill Weingarten is a well-respected man in this community. He was a conservative in Mulroney's government. He has said publicly that there's too much power in the PMO office. We're being governed by non-elected people. Harper has no respect for Parliament, no respect for the other premiers across Canada. We need a better health care plan. And in order to get that, he has to consult with the premiers of all the provinces. We need a better drug plan, which is the Green Party has been talking about. But it seems like in Canada, the word coalition is a bad word. You know, Mr. Harper does not play well with others. I saw that on his report card at school. He said he would reform Senate. He reformed it already, made it worse. You look at some of his appointees, and his hiring track record is not too good. He says Justin Trudeau's not right, but boy, look at some of the people he hired for the Senate are not too right. And the other thing I hate is attack ads. And I have a saying that says, blowing out somebody else's candle doesn't make yours any brighter. I challenged them on that, and they said, well, they work. Well, I hope they work in reverse, is what I hope they work.
Do you have a question, sir?
I do. I want to know how you three parties, well, hopefully we can get the fourth one, are going to work towards a coalition. It seems like the only time you do it is when there's a minority government. Why can't you do it when there is a majority government? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly if there's a minority government, the NDP is open to a coalition. We've said that publicly. The Liberals at this point have said no, and the Conservatives have certainly said no. As far as a majority, I guess, you know, it's the nature of the beast we have. Because I think, as was pointed out in the earlier presentation, that the goal is to get that majority and to get that power. And so there has been a tradition in the past, though, where there was a respect for opposition and that people would open it up, and that if there was limited, and that they would open up more space and allow for greater conversation and greater dialogue within Parliament. And that has been lost with Stephen Harper. That has been lost with this Conservative government. And so, and just omnibus bills, I mean, we can go into what's happened. So, certainly, if the NDP gets a majority, we are, that would be great, because then we could be in PR, and then the Green Party would have lots and lots of candidates or members of Parliament. But if we get a majority, we'd be much more open to having conversations with other parties, because we recognize that it would be a shallow majority, truly. And that we really have to involve all of the voices across Canada, that we would have committees. We wouldn't shut people down. We wouldn't tell people not to talk in committee and to articulate like we saw with Bill C-51. It's about having voices and cooperation, and then if we got a majority, bringing in proportional representation so that finally we can act like adults and cooperate.
Thank you.
I think we're pretty close to this, but Andrew, the thing Elizabeth May's looked at is she said she's not, like, when you say coalition, I mean, that implies that you actually join, like we have never had in 1985 when the Liberals and the NDP we formed a coalition government to displace the Tories. And that means they're, shared cabinet posts and that kind of formality. Then you have a party that's a coalition that has to sort of act as one. What I see, it seems we're going for, and certainly Elizabeth May has said, Green Party's aiming to have, let's face it, we're not going to form the government, but we'd love to, but I don't think it's going to happen this time. But we're aiming for 5 or 6 or 7 seats in that House, and that 5 or 6 or 7 seats with an evenly divided Parliament means that we can work with the NDP or the Liberals on any given topic or any given issue and sway and influence and barter those votes to get our vision of Canada advanced. And as I said before, hold their feet to the fire in some of the promises. But that's the kind of Parliament, and that's the kind of thing you see in a lot of other places in the world. It's not formal, but it is a working, cooperative kind of format, something we haven't seen in Canada for a long time.
I think, to be clear, when the Liberal Party says they don't want to have a coalition with the other parties, it is the formal sense of the word coalition. The Liberal Party wants to make sure that Parliament can operate and pass legislation effectively. There are very distinct views on how that might happen, or what might happen on an economic policy, for instance. If the NDP wants to cut, Liberals want to invest, you form a coalition with what there, and how does that work? So I think we have it within our parliamentary system to operate under a minority government system, and hopefully this is the last time we have to talk about this.
Two questions.
Not discouraging questions, sorry, I sounded heavy-handed.
2 questions if possible, one general, one more specific. First off, if one of your parties wins the election, how would you guys deal with the opposition to make sure they're part of the discussion of electoral reform? And secondly, for Mr. Seagram, I keep hearing from some people, this conservative hit piece, that you've compared veterans to suicide bombers. How do I tell people that this is fake and this is wrong?
Yep, thank you for that question. What you should do is ask the Conservative Party for an apology, for starters, for putting out attack ads. There was a piece I wrote that was about veterans, and it was about treating veterans as human beings and not deifying them, and our soldiers. And it was, in fact, the quote was put out up on Facebook, and then it was interesting because what happened on the Conservative Party Facebook page was it got so much positive support that they took it down and then re-edited it to make it sound worse. So what I was saying was that we have to fully respect our veterans and that we can't deify people and then just leave them and abandon them. We can't build monuments to them and then leave them with PTSD because we think they're heroes. That we have to go out and we have to follow from the time they sign on, somebody signs on in the military, to the end of their life if they've been a veteran, and support them all the way through their lives. Really, those attack ads, we need to ask the Conservative Party of Canada for an apology because they have caused trauma in the community for people of faith, and they've caused trauma just to the electoral process here in Guelph. And we really need to go out and say, listen, it's time that we have a sensible, fair, disciplined election that puts out actual people's thoughts and ideas and doesn't go around attacking people totally. It's a complete, the first one was a total and complete lie. It was a disgrace. And the Conservative Party of Canada owes everybody in Guelph an apology. All right, now I've got the question I got to answer. We would, as I've said earlier, with the, if we became a majority government, it would be reaching across. It would be opening up committees to all the different voices of all the different parties and to ensuring that people are participating in the process, because we recognize that if we do have a majority, it's a false majority, that 60% say the rest of Canada doesn't support us or didn't vote for us. So we need to have those voices in to reflect what Canada truly is, and all the voices from this diverse and huge country that we are. So that would be the plan, and that would be something I would advocate for and caucus consistently over and over again, always to be cooperating and working with others.
Well, thank you, and I don't question what you say. You're a sincere man, I believe. But however, we do have, your party whips votes. Your party has, and Mr. Mulcair has demonstrated some tendency towards authoritarianism. And I say that because one of your members, now two of your members, have crossed the floor and joined the Green Party. And what they said when they came, Bruce Hire says very clearly, he's the Green MP from Thunder Bay, who crossed from the NDP, and he said he came across because Mr. Mulcair is an authoritarian and does not allow that kind of flexibility. So I think that's the challenge that for you as a member face. You've got to shake loose that kind of authoritarian control of the leader's office. MPs have to be able to express themselves. I really wish that if you get there, you would have that freedom. But right now, I don't see it. So that's our challenge.
And one of the main parts of the Fair and Open Government agenda for Liberal Party on the realchange.ca agenda is that the local members of Parliament will be able to vote openly on most matters unless it's throne speech item or an item relating to a budget. And all else comes through strong committee support, all parties committee support. The committees will vote in their own chairs. They won't be appointed. So the chair of the committee could be from another party to try and get diverse opinions coming forward to Parliament and diverse opinions coming forward from communities to do what's best for Canada.
Just a little comment. We've got these envelopes going around. I just want to explain a little bit about them. So Fair Vote, this is not the end of the process of educating our community about proportional representation. This is really just the start. And it's fantastic that we've got these guys up here talking about it. So if you can give a donation, it would be used well. Now, a little bit about the information on the letter. Because we are in the middle of an election, third-party spending rules require us to gather information about who has made donations for anybody involved in any kind of political activities. That's why there's this information on the envelope. It's not like we're trying to track you down or anything like that. It's really Election Canada's rule. Now, so please give generously. If not here, then over at the joint when we go for goodies that these guys are actually paying for. One other thing I just want to bring forward was we worked very hard to get Gloria Kovac here. We gave her 3 weeks notice before this event was scheduled, and we were very warm invitation to her. And then when she said she had a scheduling conflict, we actually sent one of us actually went over to her office and spoke to her directly and said, would you please reconsider and be part of this conversation? So we're just disappointed that she's not here. Thank you, Steve. Please.
So I'm a one-issue voter. For the last 8 years, I've been hounding Frank Valeriot's door on the issue of proportionality. I'm very heartened by this forum, and thank you all for all that you've shared so far. And I have a two-part question for you, Mr. Seagram. It's a hard one.
Okay.
At least I think it's a hard one. So I want to get through both parts. Can you help me understand how your leader, Mr. Thomas Mulcair, can on the one hand claim to be a strong proponent of PR and on the other hand, join Mr. Harper in excluding Elizabeth May from the upcoming leader debates. In a proportional government, she would have 12 MPs in her caucus right now. So I cannot understand why Mr. Mulcair would be holding those two positions, and I really appreciate that Mr. Trudeau actually has said he would like her to be in the debates. And Mr. Mulcair is actually in a coalition with Mr. Harper on this one. And the second part is, will you personally be leading and organizing local NDP supporters and others of us who are championing proportional representation to put pressure on Mr. Mulcair to walk the talk and not just say he's for proportionality, but actually take action on it? I would like to be a part of that movement, and I'm hoping that you will take leadership there. I'm going to sit for your response.
Proportionality, you mean as far as in, like, bringing in proportional representation? Or proportionality in regards to?
Well, there's a principle of proportionality that we're talking about here, and PR, we've talked about MMP and the other one, there's specific ways of bringing that into government, but currently, if we look at the popular vote, Elizabeth May would have a caucus of 12 MPs based on the proportion of the Canadian population that wants her as a leader. And none of us can watch the leader debates and be represented.
That is a tough question. You know, I will have to, this may sound like a cop-out, but it's not, is that I would have to look into it more and find out exactly why Mr. Mulcair is saying he does not want Elizabeth May in the debates. I thought that she did a fantastic job in the first debate, and I thought she brought a great and strong voice to that. So yes, I personally, I will get your name and I will post it on Facebook what my answer is for you on that. And I'll follow through. I mean, Tom Mulcair is a man who does believe in respect for all, and he's been pushing for that, so I will follow up, and I hope that's okay with the people here. I'm happy to do that.
Go ahead, please, sir.
Thanks. Hi. So I'd like to start off by thanking someone or something, as it seems to be a bit of a tradition here for those asking questions, but I think everyone has been thanked, so I'll do it again. Thank you, Fair Vote. This has been awesome. It's been really eye-opening. When I came here tonight, I knew about proportional representation, and I knew about first past the post voting, but I didn't have an opinion on it. I'm taking a politics class right now in high school. I can't vote yet, so my vote doesn't matter, but I do have some questions for you tonight. So my teacher told me to get involved, and when I heard about this, I thought I would come check it out. And you have convinced me. Proportional representation does seem like the right way to go, but my question is, once it comes into place, if it does, and I hope it does, how are you going to protect it? When Anita did her wonderful presentation, she said that majorities are rare once proportional representation comes into place, but they aren't impossible. What if a party comes into a majority through a proportional representational system and then decides they want to bring back elected dictators? How do you protect against this? And this goes out to all parties, this question.
Good question, good thoughtful question, and I think it's, you know, it's quite reasonable. And let's face it, there is that possibility would exist. Although, you know, what I saw in New Zealand was so much enthusiasm for the process, could be the change from the first past the post to an MMP, that I was convinced that no one would ever take that away from them, because they were so enthused and there was so much participation. So I think the protection in any democracy is just that enthusiasm of being reunited with your rights as a citizen to participate and really make change and define the society that you live in. I think when you give that to people, no one will take it away ever.
Wonderful to have high school represented here. And what I said was relevance is where it's tested, at high school. So the relevance of this system can't be legislated. It has to work. And if it works, it'll be successful. If it doesn't work, there may be another system that comes up in 25 years that's better. We're looking at the next generation of democracy here. How does technology interface with democracy? How could you get your opinion into Ottawa without using your local MP? How can you become heard in the future? You can't legislate success any more than you can legislate balanced budgets. You do things properly and the score comes out in your favor. So hopefully we do things properly.